Hi guys, welcome to another video, and I want to do this video because I posted a thing about the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars and Rebels and commented that it creates huge problems and it screws up what balance in the Force means, and I attacked Dave Filoni for that, and that was incorrect, as I was pointed out by several of my followers. Thanks guys, I always want you guys to be super honest with me. If I'm making a mistake or a wrong assumption, I shouldn't really be making assumptions, but if I'm doing that, I have no problem being corrected, and that was wrong. I actually deleted the tweet after a couple of hours because a lot of people were name calling and getting emotional, so but I was wrong because the Mortis arc is very much a George Lucas thing. So I wanted to do a video about getting a final stamp on what balance in the Force actually is, because there's a lot of confusion, and there's a reason there's confusion, and I'm going to get into that as well in this video with proofs and everything else. George Lucas, Dave Filoni, everything else, interviews. So if this is something that interests you and you want to be able to say, well, no, this is a fact, this video will help you, because I've spent some time, I went through all of it, scenes in the Mortis thing, everything, George Lucas, the whole thing, to get to the conclusion that is the true conclusion, and I think is going to be acceptable by all, whether you like the Mortis arc or not. I think everyone can accept this final sort of stamp on what balance is, and you see a lot of arguments with OG Star Wars on Twitter and all these other people about this. Let's just get this done and dealt with so we don't have to keep arguing about this. And part of it's my fault too, because I left myself in ignorance. So anyways, the Mortis story is about Anakin in the Clone Wars going to planet Mortis and meeting the father, son, and daughter. The son represents the dark side, the daughter represents the light, and the father the balance. Now, this creates a problem for some because in the first 6 movies it was presented that balance was the absence of the dark, as in Anakin balances the Force by destroying the Sith, which at the time are himself and Palpatine. And this is actually something George Lucas has said, and we'll prove that to you in a bit here, but I now realize that the Mortis story was very much approved by George Lucas, even though it creates this issue of what true balance really is. So this is not a Dave Filoni thing. This was George, and he was very involved. So I want to apologize to Dave Filoni. The first thing I want to show is this Freddie Prinze Jr. interview that he did. This one caused problems for a lot of people because they took what he said at face value, and what he actually says in this interview is totally stupid. And I don't know where he got it, but a lot of people believe this. But don't get me wrong, Dave Filoni's not off the hook either. There's some issues with him too that we'll get to later.
So instead of killing Anakin, what does he do? He seduces Anakin to double the strength of the dark side. So then what does the Force do?
Balance.
It balances us. How? It gives us twins, Luke and Leia, 2 and 2. Balance. And if you look at the movie through just that simple perspective, you will not only know why every single bad guy loses and every single good guy loses, you'll know who's going to win and lose in the next movies. I can tell you, I just don't want to wreck it. People bitch about the dumbest shit like it's archetype characters.
First of all, Dave Filoni has rejected this entire concept. So I don't know what Freddie Prinze Jr. is talking about, Dave Filoni this and Dave Filoni that. He completely rejected this concept simply by having Ahsoka live through the OT. Because if it's all about numbers, then how does that work? So right away, that's totally false. And there's other Jedi as well that live through the OT. And this means, which is bad, by the way, it goes against the original lore, but this means the numerical equivalent argument in terms of Jedi and Sith is moot. Although we should have always known that, because when the Jedi were ruling and there was balance, there were a ton of Jedi. Just look at the prequels. So then he says that's the predictor of who's going to win in a fight, is this numerical equivalent. And can you imagine how pointless Star Wars is if the entire thing is based on how many of each faction there are in the galaxy? Why would anyone go watch it if they could just automatically know the Force will one side to win based on the numbers? That would be so dumb. Why would I watch that? Oh, look, there's a Jedi. Oh, well, that means the Sith's going to come. And then whoever wins, the next one, the other side's going to win. Because another Force user of that ilk will rise. It's dumb. So let's just get rid of this as balance in the Force altogether, as it's already been proven wrong, and it's just a really silly concept and makes the whole Star Wars pointless, really, if you think about it.
For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic, before the Dark Times.
So Obi-Wan is telling us before the Dark Times, or better put, the era where the Jedi ruled, was when things were balanced. That's what he's saying here. Or is he saying that? That's an interesting question.
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them! Bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness!
So Obi-Wan here thinks destroying the Sith brings balance. George Lucas wrote this So let's hear from him.
The prophecy is that Anakin will bring balance to the Force and destroy the Sith. He becomes Darth Vader. Darth Vader does become the hero. Darth Vader does destroy the Sith, meaning himself and the Emperor. He does it because he is redeemed by a son.
So, you have accepted the truth.
I've accepted the truth that you were once Anakin Skywalker, my father.
That name no longer has any meaning for me.
It is the name of your true self you've only forgotten. I know there is good in you.
So the prophecy is true. And by doing that, he redeems himself and goes from being Darth Vader back to being Anakin again.
So George Lucas does say the prophecy is true, and Anakin did balance the Force by destroying the Sith. These are George's own words. So why would he allow the Mortis arc then? And that was my question. If the Father is the balance because he is equal light and dark, then we go back to Freddie Prinze Jr.'s idea that the balance is equal light and dark, and we would simply have no need for the Star Wars because we would know how it ends. And then the same has now become true with the Kylo Rey dyad. So this is where the sequel's really screwed up. So actually the Mortis arc, I'm going to prove to you, I don't really like it, but it doesn't screw things up like the sequels do. The Kylo Rey dyad, I mean, Snoke himself says, darkness rises and light comes to meet it, who's Rey. So he's basically saying on screen that it's an endless carousel of Force users on each side rising and falling in perpetuity. But that's ridiculous. And we know that that's not true because, again, there was a billion Jedi at the beginning of the prequels. Like, that doesn't make sense. And it's both boring, dumb, and renders the whole thing pointless. So somewhere along the lines, either George Lucas did not articulate what he was trying to say to Dave Filoni with approving the Mortis balance arc, or he contradicted his own lore, or there's something else that we need to go over and get through. So let's dive into the Mortis story and see what happens in it.
Life creates it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us.
The core of the Force. I mean, you got the dark side, the light side. One is selfless, one is selfish. And you want to keep them in balance. What happens when you go to the dark side is it goes out of balance, and then you get really selfish and you forget about everybody.
Okay, so now let's go over some dialogue. So you see what George Lucas said there. He's acknowledging there's darkness and light, but he's acknowledging the use of the dark is a problem. So let's go over some dialogue in the Mortis series to see what George Lucas really means here. Father says to his son, "You are growing stronger, my son." The son says, "I am, father." And then the father says, "Vanity, however, is getting the better of you." Son says, "How so?" The father says, "You have done what is forbidden. You've chosen the dark side and allowed it to feed your anger and desire for power." The son says, "By bringing the chosen one here, you've shown me my potential. You've only yourself to blame." And the father says, "I held hope that you could resist the dark side, but I see now there is no going back." And then he stabs himself with a dagger. And the father says, "And now I die, my heart broken, the role you will play." And then Anakin says, "Well, what is that?" And the father says, "You are the chosen one. You have brought balance to this world. Stay on this path, and you will do it again for the galaxy, but beware your heart." So the son used the dark side, and that's what unbalanced everything. It's pretty clear. You've chosen the dark side and allowed it to feed your anger and desire for power. To me, this is clear as day what's going on here. And this is where I don't like the Mortis arc, because I can see why it confuses people, because why would you have the sun representing the dark, but he's not supposed to use it? And if he uses it, that creates a problem and unbalances everything. That doesn't make any sense, right? So to me, the arc, all this trilogy did was create more questions and actually made a lot of Star Wars fans think about the Force and the balance in the Force and the whole storyline incorrectly. And also, I think it did that to some of the writers, particularly J.J. Abrams, who brought in the dyad. And I think I would be willing to guess that part of the reason he did that was thinking that is what is supposed to happen, that if there's too much dark, then the light side comes, too much light, dark side, and that's balance. And when it isn't. And he presented the dyad as kind of this balance. Now, in the end, the light side won, so he kind of did do what he did, although they don't mention that being balanced, right? So, and Rian Johnson's same thing with the Snoke lines and stuff that I mentioned earlier. So this story created this problem, and it's one of the reasons I don't like the cartoons. There's a lot of lore issues with the cartoons. It doesn't actually break George Lucas's lore, though, as we've discussed, if you completely understand it, and you understand that the sun just simply isn't... And this is where it gets stupid, though, is the sun represents the dark, but he's not allowed to use it. Well, then what's the point of it, then? It's okay for the light daughter to do light stuff and be the light, right? And then having the father represent balance, but the father represents balance by not using the dark side? So then why even have this whole thing at all? Like, just have him be a light side old ancient Jedi or something and call it a day. The sun creates the problem, right? So the story arc is stupid in that sense, and George Lucas made a mistake in that sense. And the cartoons themselves, this is just one of many things that I could go into, and I probably will in the future, about some of the problems that they create lore-wise. But it doesn't technically, because it's the use of the dark side, so it doesn't technically contradict George's vision for what balance means. But it, again, I don't blame people for being confused. I was confused too. It's kind of stupid. So, all that to say, balance is not a ratio of dark to light. People using the dark side is what causes imbalance, as we can clearly see. Not that the dark side itself, just the people using it. Light side is the balance, and that's as the Force intended. The natural order is the light. Obviously, using the dark side creates disorder, which is not the light. So I think it's safe to say that what George Lucas means is just that. There is a dark and a light, but using the dark side unbalances the Force, while contrarily using the light helps to balance the Force. Now, Dave Filoni totally dropped the ball, though, in terms of helping to give people a reasonable explanation of these things, and they did so on purpose, which is a stupid way of communicating to fans who are just trying to understand the lore better. Here's a clip.
You will notice on this box that there is no lengthy documentary on the Mortis trilogy. Christian Taylor, who wrote the trilogy, and myself, we both firmly believe that we should really not answer directly a lot of the questions about Mortis. Was that really Qui-Gon Jinn that appeared to Obi-Wan in the cave or not? What does it mean that Ahsoka talks to her older self? Will she ever reach that age? Who was the father? What does it mean now that Anakin's the chosen one and that he has a better understanding of that? Ahsoka apparently died and she came back to life. Does that have any meaning? We have answers to those questions, for sure. But if I answer directly what something is, I feel that I'll be robbing you of the purpose of that arc, which is to make you wonder. It's to make you challenge certain ideas, to ask questions.
So he's telling the audience he isn't going to bother answering questions. And I would argue this mentality has slipped into recent Disney Star Wars shows as well. Even having Ahsoka be alive spits in the face of George Lucas' Star Wars, where Luke was the last hope, as spoken of by Yoda and Obi-Wan, or maybe Leia, but there was nobody else. There should not be more Jedi alive at this time, and Dave Filoni and Disney Lucasfilm have stomped out the very idea and diminished important storylines of the OT in the process. As we all know, lines from Empire Strikes Back, lines from Return of the Jedi just are moot now because there's Jedi all over the place, at least 56 of them or something. But this idea of forcing you to ask questions that Filoni presents here is kind of just a way to force you into future content hoping for answers. In my opinion, this is kind of a shyster way of writing and can be used as an excuse for poorly written stories. Even what's coming up in the next episode of Ahsoka, he's going to have this sort of fake fight between Anakin and Ahsoka, which is going to just make people have more questions, but he thinks that's good because it makes you watch more, but the viewership's down. I don't even know, I don't understand this whole strategy is weird. Like, fantasy stories, we want beginning, middle, end, problem, solution. We want answers. The first 6 episodes of Star Wars, we had very clear answers. We knew what was going on. There was no questions. And everything else since then, the cartoons and the sequels and everything else, has created this problem where people are arguing online all day because there's no real answers. And I think that's a terrible marketing gimmick. It's a shyster way of writing. All that to say, it's time every Star Wars fan takes the words of George Lucas himself and accepts that balance is not equal light and dark in terms of the manifestation in the real universe of Star Wars, but only in the spiritual sense as represented by the Father, and as we know, he chastised his son for using the dark side and unbalancing everything. Again, don't even do the Mortis arc and we don't have these issues, but they did it, so now we're here and we have to come to this conclusion, which is the true conclusion, but it's kind of dumb that we even had to do it. I'm going to leave you with this, some quotes from George Lucas to further cement the idea of what balance in the Force is. Although I think Dave Filoni could have simply been less ambiguous and just explained this in his interview, and it would have helped to unify people in the fandom that are always arguing about this topic. Maybe he didn't even know this was the answer. Maybe the writers at Lucasfilm are just totally out of it. But then again, maybe that was the plan all along, to leave all these questions right, so we have to keep coming back to the trough. Please like and subscribe if you like the content, and I have tons of stuff on my channel, so check any of that stuff out, and have a good day.